Taylor Elwood here with Sovereign Submission. And I want to talk about the death of desire and how the death of desire in a relationship is really a thousand cuts. It starts off small in hidden, almost invisible ways. It starts when you take people for granted in the relationship. You're in a relationship with her and you start paying as much attention to her. You start taking for granted that she wants you or that she's into you. You stop paying attention and she can feel it. She feels you drawing away and she knows you're not really into her. Welcome, John. Glad to have you here. Feel free to comment and question if you have anything. And it persists in all the ways that you start to routinize your life. You get caught up in, your everyday living. And so you stop making as much effort because, well, you got to cook, you got to clean, you got to work at a job, you got to do all the other different things. Or she's doing some of those things and whatever else. Death of desire is a thousand cuts because it's all the things that you start to make more important than the relationship itself. And there's an easy solution, but it requires effort. This is something that a lot of people balk at because conscious effort is involved with this. And I really do mean conscious effort. It's making the choice to say what really matters in the moment today. Welcome, Sheena. Glad to have you here. So the way that I look at desire is if you want to keep desire in the relationship going, you start by looking at how to bring in some novelty into the relationship, but you also look at the awareness and presence you bring into your relationship, into your connections with the person that you're with. It could be as something as simple as leaving a voice note, creating a little fantasy chain out of that voice note that just has this story going back and forth between the two of you. It could be a naughty text. It could be something else. That's an example right there of conscious effort, right? You're putting effort into the desire. And effort is actually sexy. People might not think that it is. Like, oh, that's not sexy. It should just come easily. It should just happen like that. And at the beginning, it often does. Like, the first few heady months where we feel the dopamine glow of a new relationship energy, it's easy to have that energy there because everything's new. But when that comes off, that's when the real effort begins, the real commitment to the erotic connection. And the erotic connection is important. Regardless of what your relationship standard is, regardless of whether you are in a DS dynamic or in a vanilla dynamic or in some other kind of dynamic or whatever it is, the erotic connection is really important. And if only one person is making the effort, or if both people kind of just settle for, the current as it is, a lot of times what will end up happening is that there will be this kind of deadening of desire. So that's one thing. We have to make that effort and that commitment. But there's other things as well. Because really what it comes right down to is if neither of you feel safe with the other, you aren't going to feel that erotic connection. And let me be clear that sometimes we mistake safety for the dulling of the sexual edge. I don't think it actually is. I think it's the deepening of the sexual edge. There's a very real difference between safety and comfort. you can feel comfort with somebody and not necessarily feel safe with them. In fact, usually you've come to a certain level of kind of like a certain level of depth, and that's all you can go to, and you're not necessarily connected to that deep sexual sensual edge, the eroticism. And so that comfort is part of that, the death by a thousand cuts, right? Because it's just like, we're comfortable here. We're comfortable. We don't necessarily feel safe with each other. We don't necessarily feel fully intimate or connected, but we feel comfortable. Genuine A genuine deep connection is one where you're able to have uncomfortable conversations, hard conversations, where you're able to say the things that need to be said, even when they aren't going to necessarily be easily heard. But what it does is afterwards, it's like in those moments that actually leads to greater trust, depth, and intimacy because you know each other and you know that each person is being real. And that's what we want. We want that realness. We want that depth, that connection. That's part of the erotic urge. I can feel safe with somebody, know that I am truly okay with them, and I can give more of myself to them than if I'm with somebody where I can only reach a certain level of depth. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm right here, but I'm not down here. Or I'm here and I'm not here because sometimes it's not just the depths, it's also the heights, right? And it's those depths and those heights that inspire the deepening connection, the erotic flow that occurs. What I see, the biggest mistake that I see a lot of men make is that they don't truly share their hearts for themselves with their partners. They share a certain amount and then they close the rest off. And this actually signals to her that you fundamentally don't trust her, that you don't feel safe with her. And even if it's not something that's consciously spoken, and let's be honest, it's not consciously spoken because most times people don't have that awareness. What it ends up creating is a corresponding feeling of distrust on her part. She knows that you don't trust her. And as a result, she can't fully trust you. She knows that you can't connect with her. And as a result, she's not going to fully connect with you. There is a real truth to this that is often missed out on in these conversations. What I found is that, and I've got two divorces and a few breakups to really verify this. So believe me, I know. What I found is that the conversations that you don't have are the conversations that kill the relationship because they create distance. I'll do another video about this, about the conversations we don't have, because it's really important. And it's one of the things that I actually help men do is I help them have the conversations that they aren't having in their life. Because the people who aren't having those conversations are essentially denying themselves a fundamental truth. They're denying they're not it's interesting, really. We'll get into this more. But here what I really want you to sit with and be present with is that the conversation that you haven't had, it kills that erotic connection, creates that fundamental cut that cuts away the desire. And a lot of times we even see this come out in terms of where the conversations turn toxic, the resentment that builds up, the stonewalling, the defensiveness, and everything else. The way I know if someone's going to be successful in a relationship with somebody else is it's really simple. It's is the person are both people turning toward each other, and are they doing so with respect and love and kindness? It doesn't mean they're always going to agree. It doesn't mean that they're always going to um, be 100% on board with each other, but it does mean that they genuinely care about each other they respect each other, they love each other, and they find a way to make it work. And let me be clear, relationships can be some work. That doesn't mean they have to be hard. It doesn't have to be hard work. I think there's like this myth that, relationships are hard. And I don't think that's always the case. And yes, granted, I've had my own experiences around relationships, but one of the things that I've really discovered is that with the right person or people, relationships can actually be easier. It just requires something that most people haven't done. It requires that they've actually done the work on themselves, on their inner wounding and their things in order to be able to recognize when that wounding comes up. And instead of using the relationship as an engine for healing, they actually take the time to respect the relationship and say, look, like I like this is where it's coming up, and I'm not going to put it on the relationship itself to heal what's going on here. Because this is again another one of those death by a thousand cuts. When we treat relationships as the place where we're going to do our healing, we are essentially poisoning those relationships. How could we not? We're bringing our wounds in, and we're letting those wounds call the shots, letting those parts of ourselves that have been so hurt and damaged call the shots, even if we try not to let them call the shots. And lest any of you who are watching this despair and think to yourselves, well, that's just kind of the reality. It doesn't have to be the reality. That's why working with me, for example, is a great way to actually address and resolve these kinds of things, because what you're getting is that objective perspective and that lens and that awareness that allows you to start seeing those patterns from a different light, from somebody who isn't personally involved with you. And this is one of the things that I find to be so critical in this work. And I found this to be helpful in my own journey around this work. When I recognized the patterns in my life that were consistently coming up in relationships to the feminine, and I'm actually gonna have a piece coming out about this on Monday about porn and like what porn teaches us about our own sexual wounding, because it does. There's a lot that can be discovered when we get curious about why we watch the porn that we watch and what it's actually telling us about ourselves. When we get clear on that, it can actually transform the way we relate, because we're no longer carrying those wounds into our relationship. We're not trying to distract ourselves from the pain. We're no longer trying to use it as a justification for being in a relationship. We're no longer looking for love in all the wrong places. In previous video, I talked about taking care of yourself. And this is another area where we see death by the death of desire, because when people don't take care of themselves, it is a huge turnoff. If I know, for example, that I have to take care of the other person, and I'm not talking about a situation where like, okay, this person's medically incapacitated and needs help for, a bit, or it's at the end of their life and everything else. And it's like, okay, like I need to step up. I love this person and take care of them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like, the daily rhythm of life and the fact that the person makes consistent effort to take care of themselves, like that matters. And I used to not take good care of myself. It was an interesting thing. I wouldn't take good care of myself in a lot of different ways. And part of it was because I really loathed myself. Well, how's anyone else going to feel desire for somebody who doesn't feel desire for themselves? The death of desire, in part, is also about the relationship you have with yourself. If you don't love, care, and respect yourself, if you don't desire yourself, why would anyone else? And there is something to be said for self-desire. Do you find yourself attractive? Do you look at yourself and think, "Damn, I'm hot"? I'm not talking about this from a narcissistic perspective. I'm talking about this from the perspective of actually valuing and caring about yourself enough to be like, like I really like who I am, and I love who I am, and I feel desirable. I can go out there in the world knowing that I am a desirable person. Whether or not anyone wants to be with me at the time, I know that I'm desirable. Like there is something really powerful and juicy and erotic about that that a lot of people miss out on. So there's something to really sit with here around desire. And one of the things that I would share with you and invite you to do is to explore what it means to feel desire in your own life. Because the death of desire by a thousand cuts really comes right down to recognizing the ways we don't connect with our own desires and the ways we start to take desire for granted. We're only as sexual or erotic as we are willing to show up for ourselves and as we're willing to make the effort for the other people involved. And that effort, is worth making. Genuine sexual desire, it comes out in many different forms in many different ways. But if we take it for granted, it will wither away. And the best sex is not necessarily that new relationship energy sex. It is the sex that is cultivated over a longer period of time where people have really gotten to know each other and they find each other desirable because they really have come to know the deepest and most hidden depths of themselves and each other. Thanks for watching. And if you need help with your own desires or exploring your relationship and like what isn't working, I recommend that you reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to connect and help you do that work.